So welcome everyone to this concurrent session, D3, Finding Home, Collaborative Response to Housing Unit Takeovers. My name is Julie and I'm joined by my colleague Kim, and we will be your facilitators for this session. Before we get started, I will review some quick housekeeping notes and then introduce you to our speakers. So you've probably already heard this spiel for the past 2 days, but I will just repeat again. So we have a Q&A feature here on Zoom that you can use to ask any questions. And William and Melissa will kind of respond to the questions as we go through the session. So feel free to ask the questions during the presentation and Kim will help facilitate the questions. And then at the end, we can also go through the closing Q&A as well if people have more questions. Please ensure your microphone is on mute. You can also raise your hand if you have a question. I'm sure we all appreciate some conversation in this session, so feel free to do that. We also have closed captionings here, so please click on the CC icon to access this function. We also kindly ask that you complete the evaluation for this session by clicking on the session in the agenda on the virtual platform. Your feedback is really helpful for us and will inform future events such as this conference. We would kindly ask that you respect all of those attending the sessions today to engage with each other respectfully and thoughtfully, and always consider the impact of your words and interactions on others. And as facilitators, we will not tolerate any abusive or inappropriate behavior. So if you engage in such behavior, you will be removed from the session. If you are in crisis and require immediate support, please click on the FAQ icon on the conference homepage to access contact information for Connects Ontario, and feel free to message Kim Rai if you need any support as well. So last reminder that this session will be recorded and you will have access to all recordings of this conference for 90 days following today. So I'm excited for that. I would like now to introduce our presenters for this session. We have Melissa O'Donoghue, for Finding Home Case Manager at the Canadian Mental Health Association, Haliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge. And we have William Bartley, who is Outreach Coordinator at One City Peterborough.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Julie. Appreciate the introduction. Alrighty, well, I guess we can kick off then if everybody's ready to go. I know that the facilitator said we could just jump right in, so we'll get moving here. Melissa and I are here today to talk a little bit about the Housing Unit Takeover team that we work on. And it's a collaboration between 3 different agencies, which is the CCRC and the Housing Resource Centre that's connected to them. One City Peterborough, which is the agency that I represent at the table for the Housing Unit Takeover. And then, of course, Melissa represents CMHA on that side of things. And so we're just here today to talk a little bit about what the Housing Unit Takeover team has been up to over the last couple of years, the impact that we've seen within the community, and how our collaborative efforts are starting to produce some pretty great results as we've gone through a lot of these different unit takeover sessions. And so if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I say Housing Unit Takeover, don't worry, we're going to address a lot of those pieces language-wise as we move through the presentation.
Okay. So our program, I'm going to do my best to not just read right off the screen because you're able to see that. So the key thing, what we had noticed, there was a couple individuals noticing some pretty significant unit takeovers in our community, didn't really have a name or a label for it at the time. Put out some surveys to different agencies around, are you seeing these things? Are you hearing these things? And from that developed, sort of raised awareness to the fact that it was occurring in the community. And then there was an opportunity for very small pots of funding for a couple of agencies individually to do what they thought might be effective or efficient to resolve the issues within their own supportive housing programs. And as a result of that, what came out was that there is very intensive key services and supports that are necessary to resolve that. So from there, eventually 3 agencies, as we said, CCRC, CMHA, and One City Peterborough came together and applied for the Finding Home funding, which is reaching home dollars. And so we are funded in support through what's navigated through United Way in Peterborough here. The Reaching Home federal dollars, that's who we answer to as our funder for our stats. And then the collaboration piece between our three agencies. If you were to look up our, mission, vision, values, you would see quite staunch differences between what we serve and the intentionality of our service delivery from all the agencies. So what better to come together, like the three of us to be able to come together and support and provide those most sort of like primary and integral services to individuals who are experiencing unit takeover. Is there something that I missed or that you want to highlight in what's been written?
No, not in particular, other than that, because our mission statements are so different between our three agency representatives, it allows us to create a lot of wraparound care for community members that are entering and exiting housing unit takeovers due to chronic homelessness and other immediate needs. And so throughout these initial projects, it really became apparent that there are inherent differences between a hostile unit takeover, and this is characterized through threats, violence, and criminal motivation, as opposed to a housing unit takeover. And we had a version of this presentation a while back where this delineation wasn't made clear, and people often got these two concepts mixed up. A housing unit takeover simply means that there's an existing relationship usually between the tenant and the guest, and it often originates out of an unmet need or mutual dependence on each other. So sometimes it's that one person got housed in a housing program with the city, and then their friend that they got through last winter together when they were living homeless in a park in a tent, for instance, they kept each other alive. And so when one person gets the housing, they want to open that up to their friend as well. But it ends up creating a lot of tenancy problems and challenges for the staff that are providing housing program supports and such like that. So that's one example. Or family and relationships as well come into play a lot of the time with the housing unit takeovers. And so the relationships are pre-existing prior to the tenancy, oftentimes that we see a housing unit takeover situation. There's also a lot of unmet needs that may include social, emotional, and economic, personal health, or many others beyond that even. Again, the guest is often known to the tenant previously, and the guests often unsheltered themselves and are willing to engage in coordinated access system supports, post housing unit takeover support and interventions. Um, and so during their stay at the actual units or at the house, as the unwanted guest or uninvited guest at that point, if there is substance use, it's on the smaller side, and the criminalized activities are more small scale than anything else. A hostile, and this is where our team supports mainly, is in a housing unit takeover. So when there's not as much of like a challenge around like criminal activities and pieces around violence, but it's more about like emotional and interdependent needs that are going on and becoming present throughout the housing program operations or between the tenant and this guest for private rental markets. On the other side of this, though, and what our team can't really support with, which is, as we'll discuss later, becomes a bit more of a challenge that we're still figuring out how to navigate, is what we call a hostile unit takeover. So this is when the tenant feels coerced or forced into accommodating a guest, often through threats of violence and oppressive language and aggressive actions. And they report being ordered on how to function within their own units. Guests are not known to the tenant usually. This is when somebody else maybe got invited in by what was originally a housing unit takeover. And so there's a couple of degrees of separation between the original tenant and the person that's causing the hostile unit. And the police, usually a police intervention is required for initial neutralization of the unit, which is removing the person that is bringing the more aggressive criminal activities into the space. And the finding home doesn't provide aftercare and supports and resources to these individuals. And there's often pieces around this where there's weapons in the household or there's trafficking going on in terms of substances. And so I just wanted to take a minute to separate those two things and to say that today we're talking about housing unit takeovers specifically. And as that is what our team deals with most of the time. Anything to add there, Melissa, or we could jump to the next
No, the screen's just frozen. It's all good.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, no, I did it. Oh, I did a whole bunch. Okay.
There we are.
There we go. Okay. So, language clarification. All right. I will just kind of preface with in my career overall, I have noticed that language has significant impacts, both positive and negative, to how and when we support individuals and connect with individuals. And so for the purposes of learning and understanding, as well as to be able to support people in a housing unit takeover. We're just going to clarify a few of the key pieces for us. This I'm going to read just a bit more quickly and then can give a bit broader example if needed. So for a tenant within the housing unit takeover, we would be defined as someone who has a legal right to be on the property in the unit. They're either the renter or owner of the property. And what we would look for is something physical, tangible, so written document typically when we're supporting someone. And it is the person who is being pushed out of the unit. And being directly impacted by the unwanted guests or guests. And then typically what we will see is the tenant is the one who would be identified facing eviction or any other kind of tenancy rights or responsibilities in the circumstance. For our guests, so we would, within the terms of sort of teaching and education, we would use the terms uninvited or unwanted guests because it's often reached the point where they are impacting tenancy. Although what we have recognized with some individuals is because of how well described that there is a prior relationship or interaction with the tenant and guest, is that by using the term with the individuals of unwanted or uninvited, it does sometimes create I guess, sort of a void or some other adverse impacts for individuals. So we would, when communicating with tenants, we would just refer to them as guests. So anyways, the unwanted guest does not have a legal right to be on property or in the unit. And that at one point in time, they may have been invited, but are no longer welcome or being disruptive or creating adverse impacts for the tenant. Will restrict or cause restrictions to the tenant's access to the space overall. So sometimes just be, if the guest takes the key to say, I'm going to go out and grab some groceries or whatever it might be, then the tenant feels as though they're not able to leave, or if they do, they're placing their own space and property at risk. And then often coming from chronic homelessness. So often guests themselves are unhoused and unsheltered, and naturally, as humans, we want to see other humans safe and secure as best as possible. And so that's where they're finding themselves into other units. Sorry, Will, I was trying to not go on to other parts that I know you have in the slides.
No, I appreciate that.
Sorry.
Are we frozen again?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Perfect. Oh, this is still you.
Oh, it's still me.
Take it over.
Okay. Keep going. Okay. So for our original intervention, we kind of have some key pieces to it. So connection to start with, and that's connecting with a tenant. For us, some of the little pieces that we've learned over the past few years is affirming legal tenancy. The one instance or a couple of instances that we noticed it was impactful is when the named tenant and the reported guests have been in a relationship, kind of like real or perceived, unfortunately, in an intimate relationship with one another. The sort of the legal rights and terms to the tenancy becomes a little more gray. And so that's one thing. So originally in an intervention, we're meeting with the tenant themselves to confirm that from our end before we proceed with an intervention, talking to them about options and opportunity, what it's going to look like. Sometimes we can do formal in person. Sometimes a written statement to a guest is helpful and can resolve. So the level of intervention can change, and we're having that conversation as well as safety and risk mitigation with tenants beforehand. And then we're also connecting with guests in the opportunity or in the moment, and explaining to them the rationale why and when they need to leave and what that is going to look like, as well as in being very clear that our program and our support is there for both tenant and guests. So we do intervention care as well as post care for both guest and tenant. I think so meeting with everyone individually. And then I guess I should sort of like sometimes some of the intervention is just about giving a tenant language and encouraging them to have certain words or say certain things or provide documentation to their guests in order to support them out. Sometimes we're actually doing the intervention in person, and that can include the tenant being present. Often the tenant is off site when we're interacting with the guest. And then one of the things in the moment with the guest is obviously a relocation. And we call it relocation because it can look like so many different things. We've had a handful of individuals who found themselves in the county of Peterborough. They actually are housed or have a place to go to, but just don't have means of getting back there. And so we're able to assist with transportation, navigating that system. Others just need a reconnection, like a really quick, warm transfer to reconnecting with Ontario Works or maybe EFRA, like whatever it may be in the system. They just weren't sure where to go or how to get there or how to access it, don't have a phone, that type of thing. So we're able to facilitate that. And our predominant support for guests and relocation is connecting to sheltering system or other, I guess, just sort of sheltering preventative supports if they're available. And then otherwise, one of our primary, I guess, sort of resources is accessing survival gear for individuals and being able to support them into sleeping outdoors, unfortunately. And then beyond that, so post care for a tenant would be about sort of information, education about what this looked like, how to prevent it in the future, what they can do or could do in future instances before it gets to the point of needing another intervention. And then beyond that, the majority of instances, we are facilitating a lock change because often a guest or guests have had access to a key over time. So it's beneficial to just do that and reset everything. Other pieces with tenants are kind of cleanup of the unit. So whether items were left behind, helping them to dispose or donate of that, or just if things were sort of used or lost, then yeah, just kind of resetting to what their norm is. And then for our guests, it would be continuing to connect with them and support system navigation and advocacy around housing resources and housing service supports that are available in community. And Will, did you want to add to that or kind of what that looks like at all, or
Not at this time because we're going to build on it as we go. But the most important thing to note here with what we're talking about is that both individuals get supports and access to services. A lot of the time we see other programs that make an attempt at this sort of work are mostly focused on supporting the tenant, but in reality that doesn't usually solve the problem because the person involved in the housing unit takeover, and as we'll talk about later with some challenges that the team faces, will often end up at another unit, another house, another apartment building, and kind of begin drifting around and accessing these different units and spaces. And so the whole point of the intervention and the supports being offered towards the community member that is the uninvited, unwanted guest in the space is to try and reduce the recidivism of going back into a housing unit takeover. So I think we can jump to the next slide.
Beautiful.
And now it is me. Okay, so the impact throughout the project. It was really cool to actually start putting this presentation together because it gave Melissa and I an opportunity to look back over the last couple of years and really get a gauge of the impact of the work that we've been doing. And so that is that over the course of the program that we've been running so far, we've offered 53 different referrals to both tenants and to guests, and that has been really good. So these referrals could look like anything from into counseling, into the Housing Resource Centre, to housing viewings and listings, as well into services towards shelters. Like here locally, we have the Brock Mission, the Cameron House, and then the One City Trinity Overnight Shelter. And so these referrals are basically comprised of what we hope will be long-term long-term supports for the individual that is leaving the original unit, and for the actual tenants, things that help to stabilize their stay with the unit that they're in, especially if they're renting. They're often, as Melissa said, facing eviction notices. So these referrals often help to mitigate and reduce the challenges that come after the housing unit takeover intervention. In terms of actual interventions, the team has done 34 different interventions over the course of 37 different housing unit takeovers. And so we've had 36 guests removed successfully from the units. And we'll talk about those percentages a little bit later because it's a pretty important number to note, is that in terms of having 37 housing unit takeovers, we've had 36 guests removed. That's a pretty awesome number to see because it's showing that the supports that are being offered, at least in the immediate interactions between the uninvited guests or the unwanted guests that are at the unit, are being appreciated and engaged with enough, at least that the person is willing to leave the unit. Our team never does any kind of forceful removements of the individual. Apologies if you just heard that. My partner has diabetes, and that was a glucose alarm on my phone that was going off. But to circle back here is that it's important just to note that people are engaging with the supports and that we don't do forced removals of people from units. And so there is consents being given on both sides for the person to actually exit the unit. In terms of tenancy preservation, this is really important too, is that out of the 37 housing unit takeovers, with many people facing eviction notices from their landlords, 37 people have been able to retain their housing after the unwanted guest has been removed from the property. And so in terms, one of the bigger challenges we're facing is that the guests that have left the property that were accessing support sometimes disappear, sometimes access different programming, and we don't really hear from them after the fact. And so we've only been able to continue connections with about 14 guests along the way. And then out of all of the unit supports that we've been asked to take a part of, there have been 6 hostile unit takeovers. I know that these numbers are. Oh, sounds like somebody's unmuted there. I think it's Deborah. Sorry, don't mean to call you out. Well, all right, I'll continue. Um, so yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about these numbers and what they actually mean for the community that we're working with. But this is just a general breakdown of what the team has been able to accomplish. So again, that's 53 referrals, 34 interventions, 37 housing unit takeovers. There have been 36 guest removes, and the tenants have been able to hold on to their housing post interventions 37 times. And then we've stayed connected with 14 guests, and there's only been about 6 hostile unit takeovers, which have required authorities to get involved for the forced removal and neutralization of the space. We'll jump to the next slide. Okay, so we have 2 types of referrals that the team receives. The first one is a self-referral, which is actually a really good one because this leads into self-reliance and a lot of autonomy in people's recovery journeys, and it's really affirming of their own choices. So this occurs and is often when a community member experiencing a housing unit takeover situation reaches out directly to the team for supports and removing unwanted guests. And the way that that happens is we hand out informational pamphlets while we're on street outreach. We do educational sessions with different agencies like Forecast, for instance, and Peterborough Social Services, so that when people start to show the signs that they might be experiencing a housing unit takeover, their worker can pass on our information to them, and then they'll reach out directly to us. And then the other type of referral we get is an outside referral, which is when an outside agency, private landlord, or other tenant reaches out to the team to support someone else in the home in resolving their HUT's challenge. These ones are a little bit trickier because basically what's happened is that somebody is observing that a housing unit takeover is happening, and the tenant hasn't specifically requested support themselves, but it's been noted that support is required. And so this requires our team to make a bit of a warm introduction of who we are. Usually we write a letter of introduction to explain our services and our program, and then we try to make an actual in-person connection at a later date. And so both of these referral types are perfectly fine, though. We do see a lot of an easier time with the self-referrals. People are more willing to engage with the services. Usually with an outside referral, what we see is that the tenant is sometimes gaining something from this relationship, and though they feel uneasy about the person's presence in the space as often as they are in there, they're still getting something. And a really good example of this is, like, for instance, members of the community that are more senior or older will often have people who come in originally as guests that are there to try and support them, do groceries for them, help them with chores and things like that. And then slowly as time goes on, the guests are still helping out with those chores and those groceries and those other pieces that the elderly person or somebody with, say, differently abled services isn't able to do. But as time goes on, the presence becomes more of a hindrance than a benefit. And so that's where it starts to switch a little bit, and they don't refer to us, but we get a referral from the landlord or from another tenant within the unit. And so, where do our referrals come from? Like I said, we have the self referrals. We also have private rentals. So, these are landlords that have their own properties that are observing maybe damages to the units or are hearing complaints from other tenants within the unit. There's housing programs like the ones run through eFry, through One City, through Forecast, and then some other agencies as well. And we also get some referrals from apartment complexes. Most recently, we've been working with a couple of apartments here in Peterborough that are experiencing some challenges around the housing unit takeovers. And then, of course, we also get internal referrals through agency partnerships as well. And so sometimes we'll have people reach out after an educational session or during an educational session and say, hey, actually, we have one of those happening. And as you're talking about it, we're realizing that. And so all of these referrals come together to basically give us our entire caseload of people that we're supporting and enable us to build connections along the way that are focused on supporting both of the individuals in the environment. So, yeah.
Okay. How our respective agencies work together. All right. So our original proposal and intention did outline specific roles, responsibilities, and functionalities between the three. So CMHA, it takes the lead on educationals, interventions, processing referrals. We also host the data reporting and ensuring that the project impacts are accurately documented and reported back to our funder. CCRC they hold the Housing Resource Centre, who is part of our team. And so they're predominantly kind of rights and responsibilities around tenancy preservation, how to move through the landlord tenant board process, and identifying just in community in general kind of housing unit takeover challenges for the referrals. And also supports both guests and tenants if necessary in housing searches. Our One City partner hands out informational pamphlets, connecting with people literally on the street in outreach where they're at, searching for individuals. They will offer referrals. I know it says to CCRC, but they'll offer referrals to any agency or service that makes sense and is meaningful for our service users and community. Meeting the immediate needs of guests while offering brief referrals and long-term supports. I feel like, is there more there? I feel like, okay, I'm just going to do a quick shout out. Will developed this slide, and I feel like you're not kind of promoting yourself as much as so Will and his team at One City are absolutely phenomenal at genuinely doing all and everything that they can to get to someone, find someone, make sure that they have their needs, whether it's just a bottle of water or a sandwich or a sleeping bag. And being super creative around how to connect with individuals and ensure that they have essential needs met, as well as those social referrals, necessary referrals. And again, I can't stress enough like how intentional they are about being physically available, mentally and emotional available and intensive or intentional in the support and services that they provide. Without the support and service and resources that One City offers in our community, we would not be able to be as involved and effective and meaningful with the guest supports and services that our team provides. And that is a huge integral part of what we do and how we're able to provide support. I guess the biggest piece for me is what I've learned. I've had the opportunity to be with the Finding Home for almost 3 years now. And the biggest piece is being able to work so closely together that we are able to interchange the supports and services that we do provide. So when one of us maybe is, off or unavailable for whatever reason, supporting something else at our own agencies, we are able to provide the same support so that each of our tenants or guests are still getting what they need in a timely manner or in the moment really is ideal. Oh, sorry, did I talk too
No, no,
much?
this is perfect. It's a good little segue. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about how our respective agencies work together. And so, the target goal is to support, again, both the tenant and the guest throughout the intervention. But mainly, and most important, is offering a 100% wraparound care. And so, when I talk about that, what I'm talking about specifically is offering connections to counseling, safe supply, medical supports like the community paramedic teams, or to doctors as well. And we do actually run a health clinic and doctor's clinic at the Trinity Drop-In Center every Thursday. And so we can actually get people connected to doctors' cares, which can get people access to diagnoses and prescriptions, and also get the ball rolling on income supports to do with ODSP and pieces around that too. It also looks like tenancy preservation and support through LTB processes, post-HUT situations. So that's handled by our member who actually isn't here today, Amanda, who is absolutely fabulous at their job. And they help to navigate people through that really complex process. If anybody here has been through an LTB board, it's pretty intensive and there's a lot of paperwork involved. And so the Housing Resource Center does a wonderful job of supporting people through that. And then obviously they can help as well with housing searches and attainment for uninvited guests following the HUT's interventions. And then in the worst case scenario is where my team comes into play a lot of the time, which is that where the uninvited guest is removed, and unfortunately due to a lack of available housing and resources and options, they're dropped into homelessness again. And the goal here is that wherever they end up, we're trying to reduce as much harm as possible. And so if they are removed and into homelessness, they're immediately connected with our street outreach team and become possible candidates for our case management that's built up for low to mid acuity individuals in the community. And so they're connected again with One City for supports around their immediate survival needs, which helps to reduce the odds of them going back into a housing unit takeover. Again, the most common reason we see for people getting engaged in a hut situation is when an immediate need is not met, whether that be food, shelter, warmth, clothing, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's also relationships because those are important bonds, that is, that we want to be present for. But we find that as we get connected with people and we're supporting them around these immediate survival needs and giving them ongoing system navigation supports and access to the by name priority list and therefore getting onto housing waiting lists with programs in the city, that we see a reduction in hut situations overall. And so, yeah, like even in the worst case scenario, the team aims to have some sort of support plan into place. And I can't say that everyone's always thrilled with that support plan when it comes to returning into homelessness, but they at least know that they have contact information of people they can go to, no matter how it ends up for them. And that's the most important piece for us.
You left the stats for me.
I mean, I can take it if you want.
So, as we can read on the screen, so from our referrals, our success rate is 97%, and that is fully removing a guest from the unit. And we have 100% of tenancy preservation. So in the moment, we are able to circumvent any eviction notices, or, source resources in community for repairs and damages if need be. And that is able to put that at bay. Our funding does require that we do 3-month and 12-month follow-up with individuals around housing. And we have had just a couple over the past few years who have lost tenancy afterwards, but it is not a direct relation to the unit takeover or the intervention. And of our guests removed, 14 of them stay connected, so that's a 39% success rate. And that's what, just to kind of add to what Will had mentioned, what we do find is maybe in the initial moment, a guest is just sort of, yeah, whatever, I'll leave, fine. We do our best to say like, hey, this is, I will have a business card, or we'll, just be, reminding where you can find us, where you can catch the outreach team, kind of day to day sort of thing for an individual, in hopes that they will come back, or maybe, in a few days or a week, reconnect with our team after the initial intervention. But yeah, we do, as far as in the moment and formal connections with our guests as a result of intervention, it's 39%.
And just on that point of 39% too, I do want to add, I know 39% can be a bit of jarring thing to look at and be like, wow, that's lower than 50. That's a failing grade. We've been conditioned to feel that way about things. But I think it's important to understand the context. Like when we're doing a housing unit takeover intervention and we're removing the guests from the space and they've agreed to leave the space and it's the middle of winter when it's cold and wet, having 40% roughly of those people re-engaging with our supports and contacting us after is a pretty big deal. It shows a level of trust and security, even though it's a really tense and difficult situation. People are getting removed from their only access to shelter a lot of the time, so I feel really good about that 40% number, and we're constantly exploring ways to increase the amount of engagement on that side of the intervention.
Mhm.
So, challenges as the program develops. I'm going to start here with huts and apartment complexes. This is like a brand new challenge. We've just been looped into supporting some folks who are experiencing huts in an apartment building. And what's really interesting is if you know anything about apartment buildings, there's like 100 units in each apartment building. And when a person is when an intervention has been applied to one unit, sometimes that person who has left that unit will just go and access another unit. And when there's 100 different units for the person to access, we can get a lot of bouncing around between the units. Moreover, in these apartment complexes, sometimes there's a lot of permission given and a lot of entrance being given towards people, right? Because at a 100-person apartment building, you're not going to know everybody. And so sometimes an unwanted or an uninvited guest will sometimes gain entrance to the building once after being removed by saying that they lost their key or they forgot it in their apartment and somebody else will let them in. And so this is proving to be a challenge because we've done a few of these interventions for these apartment buildings only for the hut situation to return afterwards, or for it to emerge in a different unit within that building. And so we are trying to brainstorm and come up with ideas of like how can we apply a total huts intervention for the entire apartment building and ensure that it doesn't kind of return back to that space. We also have, as we mentioned before, that 39% of people staying engaged with the services after the intervention. We're exploring options for how to keep people more engaged, but we are kind of struggling to bump that number up a little bit more. And it makes sense contextually because, again, people are being removed from a space that felt safe to them for a little while and drop back into homelessness a lot of the time. The willingness to engage with the folks there. We're at 3:05. 10 minutes left. Yes, okay, we are almost at the end, so we will push through here. But yeah, so we are exploring more ideas about how to keep people engaged after the intervention, and it definitely open to suggestions if anybody has one in this chat after the presentation's done. And then one of the biggest challenges we have is with the introduction of Bill 6. And if you're not aware of Bill 6, it's made it illegal to use substances in public spaces, as well as to tent in public spaces without a permit, which obviously for members of the community living in chronic homelessness creates some really severe challenges. And Peterborough has taken I'm going to use the word aggressive approach to clearing these encampments. My team has been there on a daily basis. Yes, and yes, if you do have questions, feel free to type them out into the Q&A section, and we will address those as we go along. But with Bill 6, they're pushing along encampments every couple of weeks, and so when my team gets connected with somebody after a HUTS intervention, or my team is connecting with somebody because they're experiencing a HUT situation and have ended up homeless because they've been pushed out of their unit, it's really hard to stay connected when someone gets pushed along. And when we have been meeting with them traditionally down at some of these larger encampment spaces, and then suddenly that disappears overnight or the next morning, it becomes basically we're going back to square one in terms of supports because the city will come through and a lot of people's belongings and their tents and their photo albums and family ashes and things like that get thrown out. But along with that are birth certificates and ID and access to financial information and ongoing ODSP applications. And so basically somebody's entire life just got thrown out. And when we're talking about trying to reduce the reasons people will go into huts, it's catastrophic. So Bill 6 continues to prove to be a challenge, at least in its application and consequential actions from the city and municipal level. So yeah, I'll jump to the next slide.
Yeah.
And me. So any referrals, consultations, educationals, and so sorry, just to be clear, consultations can be just a quick Q&A similar to where we're at here. You know, I've experienced this in my role and how would you support it? Educationals, we do both for agencies as well as individuals. And that is more specific to help people who are newly housed or who have left chronic homelessness to understand what a housing unit takeover looks like and feels like so that they can be proactive around that. And then to connect with us, any of the three agencies, I mean, if you contact any of these agencies and ask to speak with Finding Home or someone from Housing Unit Takeover, they will know how to get you to Will, Amanda, or I. And if you want to jot down this information, I know it's going to be available afterwards. We have 90 days or whatever I believe it is after this to be able to view it. And then our email address is Finding Home, which sounds super easy, and then the rest of it is what makes it difficult. But Finding Home at CMHA-HKPR, so Canadian Mental Health Association, Haliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge.ca. I think that's the biggest piece. And yet we do our best to be as informal as possible so that we're not creating barriers. So if you're able to call or have a service user call us or meet with us at our agency, we're going to do our best to not impose a whole bunch of paperwork and documents. We do our best to kind of help support that in the back end as much as possible so that we are able to connect with people in real time and in real life as much as we can. There we go. Questions or comments? Oh, sorry.
I thought I had seen a question come through, but now that I'm looking at it, it seems to have disappeared. Maybe I missaw that. Well, we must have either done a very thorough job or people are very tired after a long day of conferencing.
Are you okay if I click off this so that I can see humans?
Yes.
And now I don't know how to do that.
Thank you, Jules. Always good to have some
You
support
go
out there.
to share and stop sharing.
Oh, there we go.
There we are.
Any
Thank
questions
you.
for our
Thank you,
lovely
Lenora.
presenters?
Is
There
this only
question-
for Peterborough, Melissa?
Where?
We just from Lenora, we were asked, oh, sorry, I might have misread that. So Alexandra asks, is this only for Peterborough? Is the Huts intervention team only in Peterborough?
So we specifically, our team functions within Peterborough, the county of Peterborough. I think our last round of funding, we were able to expand to the county of Peterborough. We will absolutely do everything we can to support you. If you have a specific dynamic that you want to run by us, we can consult over the phone. If you're like, within a couple hours driving distance, we can probably make time to come out and support alongside you for an intervention. But yeah, as far as our actual resource team, there is a support in Toronto if you're closer, as well. London and Kingston also have a very similar resource team.
Oh, perfect. You're in Toronto. So yeah, I would definitely take a look at the team that is there in Toronto for support.
The team in Toronto calls themselves the Dream Team. So if you Google that, it'll come up for you.
There's also another question in the chat from Lenora. What can be the plan at the end of the project?
At the end of our project?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that, Lenora. If you want to come off mute and explain a little bit more.
Sorry, I'm finding all the buttons or not finding all the buttons. So at the end of the project, was it March 2026? What's the plan? Are you going to be able to navigate some kind of continuation, additional funding? I know that's always a challenge. Do you have thoughts on what that can look like? Are there trainings for other organizations that could potentially support some of those positions? I mean, I'm down in Niagara, so I mean, housing is critical all over the place, so I recognize that. And these kinds of issues.
So part of our funding, there is a requirement for us to do training with other agencies, other individuals. So that's definitely something we are very available and open to. As far as, so this is for CMHA, this is third round of funding, all reaching home dollars. For Will and I, this is second round of funding. Second round of funding as a collaboration. And I will highlight that our second round of funding was granted very much on the fact that we are a collaboration of three separate agencies, and that is a huge push in many sectors, many sort of sectors within social services, is the collaboration and the demonstrated need and value of agencies working together. So we kind of had basically a 50% guarantee based on that alone with our secondary funding. And so my worry, I am responsible for collecting our data. Will is phenomenal at understanding, interpreting, and helping me to understand the data. And so I do worry that our numbers are not going to grant us funding for another round come March. Our challenge is that we know there are exponentially more housing unit takeovers transpiring than what is being referred to us. And so I guess our pitch or our need would be to, how do we source those out? How do we support in those circumstances?
Yeah, and just to elaborate that on a little further, yeah, we are absolutely seeing more huts than we have in the past as housing's become more unaffordable and it's harder to meet the immediate needs for people who are living unhoused. The challenge is that both landlords, tenants, and co-tenants of spaces, and also guests who are staying in there, because sometimes the guest wants to leave as well, are hesitant to refer to our supports because there's fear because there isn't a full understanding of the programming, there's fear that it could lead to evictions or further complications, or there's a lot of disqualifying thoughts about, well, no, this couldn't be a hut situation because, this is my brother, or this is my family member, and so there's hesitation to engage with the services, which is why we do these educational sessions as well, is to inform people, is like, hey, like they can be your brother, and that's fantastic, and we're really just looking to provide support and care along the way, so that you both find something that works well for you, and we resolve what's not working well for you right now. So it's a big push that we've had to engage in more of these educational sessions for that reason. We hope that the numbers will increase in terms of the referrals, but it's I think a lot of the time when it comes to these sorts of programs, people are worried that it could be consequential for them or lead to negative results, and so we do our best just to engage in those conversations one-on-one as we get connected.
Okay.
If you want proposal information, Will and I are happy to share that. If you
So part of it comes down to as an Indigenous employment and training agency, we work with a specific directive. However, we get very creative in what that looks like. And transportation and housing are like the prime challenges. We just in June started with two social workers through the Niagara Prosperity Initiative, and their focus is around poverty and housing. And so I'm thinking that within that framework of what they're doing, this may also be something for them to understand differently if they don't. I mean, I don't always know, I don't know what they know. I just know they're here and those are some of the things. I would be interested in if you could send information that I might be able to forward to them that they could kind of assess and say, okay, hey, like I want some more information about what you're doing there to understand the potential to get that training and support that kind of process here. And if that's something that could be a support process, could that potentially add to your numbers, and just not from area, but for the fact that you've created that space, and because now there's others with that training, these situations have been averted or redirected.
Yeah, we have one out of area agency who connected with us. And I think we did like an original phone consultation, and then we did Will and I were, it was close enough that we were able to do an in-person presentation. I'm referring to the KL folks. Well, and so it was really neat we did the consultation. It was an intensive consultation phone. And then when we did the presentation, it was, okay, well, here's the scenario, and this is what we did. We were able to we start with these pieces that you suggested originally. So now what? And then we were able to offer some greater, I guess, sort of like more progress, greater detail. And then they came back to us again and we're like, okay, we just need some more information because we did all these things and now this is where we're at. And Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were coordinating with your team to be able to do some side by side, basically like role modeling and witnessing what was transpiring in person. So we can definitely be as creative as possible and do whatever our timing and our agency and our roles will allow us to do.
Yeah, I'd really like to connect you with the social workers on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just two things off of that is I've just shared the HUTS brochure, which has all that contact information into the chat there. So you can download that as a PDF for anybody that's interested in connecting with our team for consultations and to speak further about the HUTS team and our collaborative efforts. And I don't mean to cut it off, Lenora, but I did notice that Stuart has a question as well from the city of Hamilton. So I'll just read this question here, which is, would you say that the local social housing providers have proactively built our program into their eviction strategies used by their staff in working with tenants? And yes and no is the answer to that. Some programs are becoming more and more excited to engage with our services as they've gotten to know our individual team members a little bit more and bring us in. And so I don't want to single out any agencies that haven't reached out to us that are experiencing HUT situations, but I will say that we have had other housing programs reach out for HUT supports, and we are actually working closely. One City also has a housing program, and so we've bridged that gap too into supporting them. But again, the resistance that we're getting a little bit from some of the housing programs here in the city of Peterborough is the feeling no one wants anyone to end up evicted from their space. And so this conversation comes up a lot, which is that we're trying our best to avoid evictions. We don't want people to be put back into homelessness. And so sometimes people see us as like a final measure of a housing unit takeover, when in reality we should be like the first intervention method. And so one way we are trying to incorporate that a little bit more, Stuart, is by having these educational sessions and offering them to agencies. And so we've done these presentations with Forecast, with One City. We've done it with community care as well for some of the more like retirement home and support worker home focused spaces. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Stuart. Do you have any?
No, I appreciate that. I'm just thinking if you're like a tenant support worker or whatever you're called, working with this social housing provider, to have that tool in your toolbox is huge, right? Because you're trying to, stabilize that community, stabilize that individual. And it can be a lot of time and work to try to sort through that. And if you have a team that'll go out and assist, I think that's a great resource. And you're taking care of the person that's also, part doing the takeover. You're not just focused on saying getting them out and leaving them with no options. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. It's a good one, and it's really interesting because I'm looking at our numbers. Our interventions don't usually result in an eviction, and so it's interesting that there's this feeling going on that if people get involved with the HUT's dynamic or supports, that it'll somehow risk eviction processes. So it's something we're navigating through every time we start to work with larger complexes and housing programs. I think that was the only other Q&A question that we had. Oh, it was even marked as answered. Fantastic. Okay. Any other questions? I know we're coming up to the end of our little time here. I think our facilitators are eager to start moving towards the closing pieces.
Yeah, for sure. If no one has any further questions, and I know we'll drop the contact information in the chat, so feel free to contact them for further questions if you have. So thank you again to both of you, William and Melissa, for your wonderful presentation. For folks, just a reminder to fill in the survey for this session. You can click on the agenda in the platform and then choose the session you're currently attending. It will help us a lot. And then we're pretty much at the end of the conference. So please join us for the closing remarks. You can click on the agenda and then choose the closing remarks and click on the join button. So yeah, thank you all again very much and hope you enjoyed this session.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Roarous applause. Fantastic. Oh, look at it all. That's brilliant.
Not quite the same as hearing it in person, but
No, but
still
it's tickling something in my brain. The dopamine's coming off from all the clapping and hearts. So that's brilliant. Awesome.
Okay, I think we can jump off.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for facilitating this, Kim and Julie.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Yep, that was awesome. Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.